This Hangout on Air is live. Okay, we're there. This is Illia, and I'm coming from Salt Spring Island, BC, Canada.
And this is Philipp from Berlin, Germany.
And we're coming together today to speak about body electronics, John Whitman Ray's holistic modality that has been passed through many teachers. Douglas Morrison was my direct teacher, and I'm now an instructor since 2003, and have been holding yearly events, point holding intensives, and would like to keep it going on a question and answer through this Google Hangout. So this is what we're starting today.
Perfect. So this is our first podcast, and we have developed a small outline. We would like to start with a short introduction about what body electronics is, and I'm sure Illia, you can lead a bit through the program, and I'll mainly focus on asking my questions.
Yes, great. That when people have asked me over the years, what is body electronics? That's something that can be talked about in increments. Let's suffice to say at this point that it is a complete, holistic healing modality, self-healing modality that is learned and practiced within a group initially. Also, every individual who practices it individually in their own lives, but through point holding intensives, we come together and practice as a community. As an instructor, I am teaching people, and then it is applied as a group.
Mm-hmm. How about this whole aspect of evolution? Because healing is certainly true, but in my opinion, it may be even a bit too narrow defined, because healing is a bit problem oriented, and especially the evolutionary aspect of body electronics for me is very important, even if you don't have any health issues right now.
Yes. Well, healing doesn't necessarily have to be coming from a perspective of fixing or health issue. Very much in the title of Doug's book, How We Heal. So how we heal is an internal process of consciousness change. So that's very important to understand in the preliminary aspects of understanding body electronics.
Yes. So how should we proceed? You've talked about point holding, you've talked about healing, and you've also mentioned
Yes.
Doug Morrison's book, How We Heal. Just to understand a bit the structure of how we want to proceed and what key things we want to learn if we have to give a short overview of body electronics.
Let's start by just outlining briefly what holistic means in relation to body electronics. The holistic model has 4 cornerstones, and that directly applies to body electronics in the sense that what we call the bottom of those 4 cornerstones is physical. So physical and physical law. Then we go to emotional and emotional law, mental and mental law, spiritual and spiritual law. Those are the 4 cornerstones. And when we talk about from the bottom up, it's in that order that we're speaking. So with that in mind, we begin in body electronics by starting to follow the physical laws in relation to nutrition. The physical laws encompass an enormity of aspects, but suffice to say at this introduction point that nutrition is an excellent place to start. In the nutritional program that is relative to body electronics, we have very specific supplements that we use in preparation for point holding. So, and as we begin to understand those more and more, that comes with experience, I might add, because the enzymes, which is number one at the top of the list of supplements, and then the second in line is the mineral supplementation. Then we go to probiotics. Then we go make sure that we have our essential fatty acids. Then we make sure that we have enough probiotics, and the list goes on from there. These all come together physically to promote the process of body electronics, in the essence that we must have a physical vitality in order for the electronic body to work effectively and efficiently. I had that in my early teachings. In one of my very first workshops, I was very focused on the physical and getting people prepared physically in order to do the point holding. And in the first point holding, which is sustained acupressure, we came together. It was a small group of about a dozen people, and everybody was really cooking on the tables. It was, people were getting a lot of heat in the points, and there was a lot of emotion being brought to the surface, and it was going really well, except for one woman who nothing was happening. The point was flat. It started flat. There was no sensation either from the point holder or the point holdee. So we stopped that particular session, and I questioned the person, who then said to me, I have someone at my door, then said to me that that she had not prepared by taking the minerals at all. She had not ingested any of the minerals prior. She had missed that part in the lectures and readings. So that experience taught me how ultimately important it is to be prepared sufficiently, on that very base physical level.
So if I understand it correctly, there was one great diagram in Doug's book, and it showed the physical body being enveloped by the emotional body, which in turn is surrounded by the mental body, which in turn is like a part of the spiritual body. So it's like a bit of a pyramid or a trickle down. Or like
It's a layered, yes, it's layers to the fact that the physical aspect, when we, I dislike the word obey, but sometimes it is appropriate in relation to talking about natural law. So when we obey natural law, which means becoming very nutritionally prepared, as one example, then that allows for in-body electronics through the point holding and through the transmutational program, that we move then into the emotional body. So one leads to the next. As I said earlier, in the physical moves into the emotional moves into the mental moves into the spiritual. But this is a very gradual and methodical process in body electronics. By opening ourselves to that obeyance of the physical natural principles, then that naturally allows for the opening to the emotional body. Okay. In other words, yeah, go ahead.
So basically, you said it's a healing modality, and there's a sustained form of acupressure and a certain preparation that has to be done with the physical body in terms of nutritional readiness. You mentioned enzymes, you mentioned minerals, and probably also a certain attitude towards live foods, macrobiotics, etc. So this is like a prerequisite before you can start, right?
I wouldn't say macrobiotics, but as much, we need a little bit of raw protein in our diet each and every day. The raw protein is very important for the for the process of hormone development, and we're really looking at on a physical level, we're really looking at supplying the necessary nutrition for the endocrine system to be as ready and hormonally efficient as possible. Also, I'll point out the bottom-up approach also is in direct relation to our endocrine system. So the bottom of the endocrine system is the gonads, which in body electronics is related to unconscious or the subconscious. As we move up, what we call upscale, which is in direct relation to the emotional body, you begin to experience and see how the physical body allows for that emotional body unfoldment. So in other words, we're going in relation to the gonads and the unconscious subconscious, we're beginning to open things, our own things, personal, individual process from that place. So we're coming, this is where also willingness is extremely important. So by even approaching the body electronic system, we're asking our own consciousness to unfold for us in a perfect natural way what has been hidden in the unconscious subconscious from us. So it is given to us a little bit at a time to transmute. We're given just the right amount each and every time to transmute, and then it's up to us to remain aware and observational at that point to be able to then take that into the transmutation process. And this is a very gradual upscale movement. This is how when we hear the term upscale in relation to body electronics, we are referring to that upscale movement through the emotional body or the endocrine system. The endocrine system and the emotional body is directly linked. It's the same.
So how do, just for some people who have never heard like these terms, how there's a form of acupressure, and then what happens? How is this? How do I need to understand this transmutation? What's actually happening when you say move upscale or move into the emotional body?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at the what we call the flow sheet in body electronics, which is an acupressure flow of points, and they're very specific. So to give an example, the very first points held is what we call the STO. So we can look in Doug's book, and there's a lot of in how we heal, and there's diagrams and explanations on this. So by holding the STO points, which is 2 points held at the base of the occiput, we from there unlock this is in direct relation to unlocking unconsciousness. We again, it's very experiential, and but at this point in introduction, I want to say that the sustained acupressure, so these one set of points, what we refer to as the STO points, are held for usually at least 2 hours and sometimes even 3 hours, depending on the person and depending on the circumstance. So the flow sheet is very exact and methodical. So and it's in relation to the endocrine system, and which is in direct relation to the emotional body. So it is a very exact and methodical process that unfolds perfectly. It's a perfect unfoldment of the holistic process of healing.
Okay. So there's a strict sequence that we have to follow in order to have the right foundation for development, right?
That's right. And there's a very basic reason for this. When I've seen people who were quite zealous on the program and they wanted to perhaps skip a couple of points and move to the so-called higher points, or the points that are higher on the endocrine system, upscale, and so they wanted to skip a couple of steps, or things that perhaps they judged as being not quite as juicy, or maybe it seemed when they were working through like some apathetic points in relation to apathy, in relation to the spleen. Perhaps those were seemingly boring points. So in those judgments, I have seen people attempt to skip those levels and want to move upscale into more griefy or angry points. In relation to the pancreas and the thyroid and so forth, and they became very much stalled. And this, of course, it's all a learning process. So then they would go back and work through what they had attempted to skip. But it's very experiential in the sense it took me several years to really get a grasp of how perfect the process works in natural law. Natural law is working in perfection. We only need to look at the night sky to have that realization. So this is directly related to body electronics in that that perfect unfoldment.
Okay. So let's maybe, I think we're probably going to talk separately about nutrition and a lot of these things, because they probably require a lot more detail than we can cover in the introduction. But
Yeah.
can you explain me a bit what a typical body electronics session looks like?
Okay. I would change the word session to intensive, because a lot of people over the years have, we're very much in the medical model of patient practitioner, and even that is very much evident in a lot of alternative and natural health processes. So I want to make that difference clear in body electronics. It's not a patient practitioner model. It is a community model of healing, whereby we learn the process by our own personal study, by our own personal dedication and commitment to our physical health. And then when we get to a certain point of readiness, we come to an intensive, a body electronics point holding intensive. And at that intensive, which can only be held by a certified instructor, which there are very few on the planet left at this point that are actually actively teaching. So when a person finds themselves at an intensive, they are then let's look at it. I'll say it from my perspective. When a person finds themselves at one of my intensives, then they can expect to be fully prepared prior. That is my commitment. I have very specific guidelines to prepare a person well prior before coming to my event. So when they are actually at the event, we are then readied and prepared to begin the point holding process, or the sustained acupressure process, which is table work, which means each person gets on the table to do their own individual work while having their points held. Equally, they are also holding points for others. So in this way, it becomes a very equal process in the giving and receiving. And this was one of the basic parts of the process that really intrigued me back in the beginning of my introduction to body electronics in 1999. When I saw that it was a community event where people are assisting each other, and an equal event in that sense of giving and receiving, point holding.
Okay. So giving and receiving point holding is very important, I understand. How much time should I plan for this? Like how much time can I expect if I have a certain ailment for getting rid of it or for healing it? Is there an indication?
The words getting rid of is a very interesting process. I would say let's get rid of the words get rid of. So every individual that I have seen that has made their way to a point holding intensive over the years, whether it be one of Doug's or my own, has come with their own set of reasons for being there. Some of them are physically motivated. In other words, there can be some form of degenerative process going on in their body that they would like to heal. And that was their motivation for getting to the event. Now, the question in there that I'd like to address is how long prior would somebody prepare before coming to an event, for whatever reason they're motivated to come to the event. The minimum amount of time would be a 6-week, very intense time prior to getting to the event. That would be a 6-week nutritional supplementation process, following all of the different protocols for body electronics preparations, which includes a lot of reading and watching videos and so forth. So the minimum amount of time that for my events is a 6-week process. When I began going to Doug's intensives, Douglas Morrison, back in 2002 was my first with Doug. And I had been preparing for a couple of years for an intensive, and by reading, I read all of John's books, all 3 of John's books. I was on the nutritional program for a couple of years, and I was very much prepared psychologically and physically to show up at Doug's first event that I had attended. Beyond that, then I began going. Doug would at that time give 3 intensives per year, 2 being 2 weeks in length, 1 being 4 to 5 weeks in length. And I attended each one every year for several years, which then became, it was never a point in my life of needing to prepare. It was going to what we call saturation level of supplementation, and then I would come out of the healing crisis. So basically I was going into the healing crises and being as ripe in a healing crisis prior to coming to the event, so that I was getting as much out of each event as I possibly could. Then when I would return to my home, I would then lessen very gradually the supplementation program and back to what we call maintenance level of supplementation. So that's very important to understand, that the supplementation program of body electronics, sometimes referred to as the RAISE nutritional program, it gives us the what's necessary to bring us up into the healing crisis, bring us into the ripeness of the healing crises. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I mean so it gives a good indication that it is it's not a fast shortcut. If I want to get let's keep the term for a while. Let's get rid of a physical problem. So just the preparation in terms for the nutrition and also getting a bit into the details of body electronics requires at least 6 weeks, correct?
That's right.
And
yeah.
And then
the longer the better.
The longer the better. And then there's a sequence that should be followed before I can actually come to the core root causes of the physical problems, correct?
Everything that we do in preparation, whether it be the psychological preparation, which is in the reading and the videos, as well as the nutritional program, everything that we do to prepare is in direct relation to what we are going to get out of the process. In other words, as ripe as we are in that healing crisis is as much access that we're going to have available to us to our own suppressed consciousness that is going to come to the surface in order to be released. And and then that takes us into a whole other process of learning at that point, which I don't think we should get into today. But in these continued audio recordings, we will continue the process and expand the process. I want to say one thing that seems to be a little a core issue in this particular recording. I want to share a little story of my friend Jane Brown, who was, in my opinion, one of the body electronics elders. She passed on a couple of years ago at the age of 94, and was one of my mentors through all my years in body electronics, in the learning processes. And she shared with me at one point, when she started body electronics, she had learned that she had macular degeneration. And of course, when your eyesight is beginning to dwindle, so to speak, it took a lot of her attention. So this was one of her main inspirations to begin the process and continue the process of body electronics. So in her several years, and she had, by the time I met her in 2003, she already had, I believe she began in the 1970s. She was over in Maui with John, in Pennsylvania, spent, a lot of, did a lot of point holding intensives. Now, what she shared with me was she would get on the table with the underlying idea that she wanted to heal her eyesight. And so after all these years and all this work, what she ended up doing was healing everything that that was not her eyesight, that required healing within her body. So she experienced so many different types of spontaneous healings within her body, but yet not her eyesight. And she shared this with me to make a very specific point that that little bit of resistance that she brought to the table, that was the idea that she wanted to heal her eyesight, prevented her from ever healing her eyesight. So this is something that we can all spend some time in contemplation and in contemplation of. It's a very important principle to understand.
So you were talking about the intention of healing this this eye problem, and
Yes.
you mentioned resistance. So it's
Yes.
probably important to maybe talk a bit about what attachment and resistance is, and also what the whole idea of body electronics is about the causes of physical problems.
Yes. Okay. Well, that brings up uh, the amount of actual awareness that we are working with as a human consciousness. It has been stated in body electronics by John, by Doug, and by myself and other instructors that we are working with perhaps 95 to 99% unconsciousness. And so with that in mind, we are working with 1 to 5% conscious awareness. So let's say, for example, that we are working with 95% unconsciousness. Some consciousness that we are, that is running as a program within us, that is creating everything that we experience, yet we are fully unaware of it. So with that in mind, that can be considered resistance. What we are unaware of may be considered resistance. Let's put resistance in a very simple term, which is anything less than unconditional love. So anything less than unconditional love can be considered resistance. And then let's look briefly at that word intention. So if we are working with 1 to 5% conscious awareness, little to no power, in the sense that 95+% of what we actually are creating is from the unconscious mind. So coming to anything in life with an intention, if we realize that that intention is a very limited perspective, and we keep that as a grain of salt, let's say, then we can really get to the work of unraveling and unfolding that unconscious mind that is really in control of our actions and our life itself, our manifestations, our moment-to-moment manifestations of our own life.
Okay.
Does that make it a bit clearer?
Yeah, so I understand, if I understand you correctly, whatever we perceive as our free will, or our daily life that is being shaped by our decisions, is just the tip of the iceberg, and most of what we think we're actually free in, we're not.
Well, the idea of free will itself is an interesting idea, because as we unfold our own unconsciousness, we soon learn in body electronics that the idea of free will is a very limited idea. So we're as free as we are aware, and that awareness expands as Are you back? I lost you. Maybe there's a time limit on this. Can you hear me, Phil? Now you can call me from Hangouts on the air. History is off. Oh no. Oh my God. Okay, let's see. It's not lost. I'm not going to let it be lost. Oh, I'm still on. Stop broadcasting.